The cold rain beat down mercilessly on the Wyoming prairie as Isaiah Morgan squinted through the downpour, the brim of his hat providing little shelter from the deluge that had transformed the dirt road into a river of mud. He had not expected to encounter another soul on his journey back to his ranch, especially not in this weather that seemed determined to drown the entire territory. But there she was, a lone figure clutching something to her chest, standing motionless on the side of the road, her dress soaked through, her shoulders trembling. Wyoming Territory, 1876. The country was celebrating its centennial, but out here, civilization hung by a thread. Isaiah guided his horse closer, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver on his hip, a habit born of necessity in these lawless lands. As he approached, he realized the bundle she held was not a package but a child, no more than 2 years old, equally drenched and silent. Isaiah dismounted without a word, his boots sinking into the mud. The woman looked up, her face pale and streaked with rain or perhaps tears. He couldn't tell which. Their eyes met, and something in her gaze, a mixture of desperation and defiance, stopped any words he might have spoken. Instead, he stepped forward, removing his coat despite the chill that immediately bit through his shirt and wrapped it around both mother and child. He said nothing, just held them both. "They killed him," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "My husband. They killed him and burned everything." Isaiah nodded, understanding all too well the lawlessness that plagued these territories. "I have a place," he said simply. "Warm, dry food. I don't know you," she replied, clutching her child tighter. "Isaiah Morgan," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Ranch about 3 miles east, and you're standing in the rain with a child who needs shelter." The woman hesitated, looking down at the child in her arms whose lips had taken on a bluish tint. "Darcy," she said finally, "Darcy Greene, and this is Emma." Without further conversation, Isaiah helped Darcy onto his horse, handed her the child, and took the reins, leading them through the storm toward the promise of shelter. Isaiah's ranch was modest by some standards but substantial for a man who had built it alone. The main house stood sturdy against the elements, a testament to careful craftsmanship. A barn and corral extended from one side, housing several horses and a few head of cattle, the beginning of what he hoped would someday be a prosperous operation. Once inside, Isaiah stoked the fire in the stone hearth until it roared with welcoming heat. He moved with practiced efficiency, heating water for baths and preparing a simple but hearty stew from the previous day's hunt. Darcy stood near the fire, still holding Emma close, as if afraid the child might disappear if she loosened her grip. "There's a room in back," Isaiah said, gesturing down a short hallway. "Clean clothes in the chest, might be big but they're dry, bath water's heating." Darcy nodded, her eyes surveying the cabin with wary assessment. "You live alone?" "Just me," Isaiah confirmed. 5 years now." "Why?" Isaiah paused in his work, considering the question. "Simpler," he finally said. "After the war, crowds didn't sit well, came west, found this land. Been working it ever since." He didn't mention the nightmares that still woke him, the memories of Antietam and Cold Harbor that haunted quieter moments. Some things weren't meant to be shared with strangers. While Darcy bathed and changed Emma, Isaiah prepared the spare room, adding extra blankets against the chill. By the time they emerged, both wearing oversized shirts that functioned as makeshift nightgowns, the stew was bubbling invitingly and the cabin had warmed considerably. They ate in relative silence, broken only by Emma's occasional babbling and Darcy's quiet encouragements for the child to eat. Isaiah didn't press for details. The West had taught him patient stories came in their own time, like spring after a harsh winter. "We had a farm," Darcy said suddenly, setting down her spoon. "Near Cheyenne. Samuel, my husband, had been working the land for 3 years before we married. Good land, fertile," her voice caught. "Men came, said the land was theirs now. Samuel argued, showed them our deed. They laughed." Isaiah nodded, familiar with the story. Land disputes were common, especially with the railroad companies expanding their reach across the territories. Samuel wouldn't leave, Darcy continued. Said we had rights, the law. She laughed bitterly. As if the law matters out here. It doesn't, Isaiah agreed. Not often. They came back yesterday, more of them, with guns. Darcy's hand shook slightly as she reached to smooth Emma's hair. Samuel told me to run with Emma. I heard the shots as I ran. When I looked back, the house was burning. Isaiah sat quietly, allowing her grief the respect of silence. After a moment he spoke. You can stay, long as you need. Spring planting's coming. Extra hands always useful. Darcy looked up sharply. I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Morgan. Isaiah, he corrected, and it's not charity. It's an exchange, help for shelter, nothing more. Darcy studied him as if trying to read intentions behind his stoic expression. Finally, she nodded. Until I figure something else out, and I'll work. I'm good with gardens, animals, not afraid of hard work. Never doubted it, Isaiah said, rising to clear their bowls. Get some rest. Storm's not letting up tonight. That night, as rain continued to pound the roof, Isaiah lay awake, listening to the occasional creaks of the house settling and the distant sounds of Darcy comforting Emma after a nightmare. He wondered about the men who had taken Darcy's farm, whether they would come looking for her. The territory was vast, but vengeance had a way of shrinking distances. Morning brought clearing skies and a tentative routine. Isaiah rose before dawn, as always, to tend the animals and check fences. When he returned for breakfast, he found Darcy already awake, Emma on her hip, as she prepared a simple meal of cornmeal mush and coffee. Don't usually get breakfast made for me, Isaiah commented, hanging his hat on a peg near the door. Seems fair exchange for shelter, Darcy replied. Her hair, dry now, fell in auburn waves to her shoulders, and in the morning light, Isaiah noticed the scattering of freckles across her nose and cheeks. Garden needs attention, Isaiah said after breakfast. Seeds in the storage shed, soil should be workable after the rain. I'll see to it, Darcy nodded, already clearing dishes with efficient movements. Emma can help, can't you, sweet girl? The child, now animated and curious in the safety of daylight, grinned toothily. The days settled into a pattern. Isaiah handled the livestock and heavier ranch work, while Darcy tended the garden, helped with cooking and cleaning, and gradually expanded her contributions to include mending fences and assisting with the cattle when needed. Emma toddled after them both, collecting chicken eggs with solemn concentration, and chattering to the horses in her own incomprehensible language. They spoke little of the past. Isaiah never asked about the men who had taken Darcy's farm, though he rode a wider perimeter around his property each day, watching for strangers. Darcy never questioned the occasional nightmares that had Isaiah pacing the porch at midnight, his eyes fixed on distant horizons, as if expecting ghostly regiments to emerge from the darkness. Instead, they focused on the present, the immediate needs of survival, and the gradual building of a tentative trust. Their conversations, initially practical and brief, slowly expanded to include observations about the changing seasons, memories of childhood, and cautious hopes for the future. Never had much schooling, Isaiah admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and crimson. Emma had already been tucked into bed, exhausted from a day of helping Darcy plant carrots. Read some, numbers come easy enough for ranching. I was a teacher, Darcy said, before I married Samuel, tiny schoolhouse in Ohio, 12 students ages 6 to 16. Isaiah glanced at her with newfound appreciation. That explains the books you keep eyeing in my shelf. Darcy smiled, a rare expression that transformed her face, erasing the constant vigilance that had marked her features since their first meeting. I miss reading. Samuel thought it frivolous once we had the farm. Without comment, Isaiah rose and entered the house, returning moments later with a leather-bound volume. Whitman, he said, handing her the book, gift from a friend in the regiment. Never made much sense to me, but the words have a nice sound. Darcy accepted the book with reverent hands, opening it carefully. Leaves of grass, she murmured. I've heard of it but never read it. Keep it, Isaiah said, or at least borrow it a while. Something shifted between them that evening, a recognition of depths beneath the practical partnership they had formed. Isaiah found himself noticing things he had previously overlooked. The graceful efficiency of Darcy's movements as she worked, the musical quality of her laugh on the rare occasions when Emma's antics broke through her reserve, the intelligent assessments she made of the ranch operations without presuming to instruct him. For her part, Darcy began to relax the vigilant tension she had carried since their first meeting. She noticed Isaiah's gentleness with Emma, the way he would pause in his work to answer the child's endless questions with patient seriousness. She observed his calloused hands, capable of both incredible strength and surprising tenderness, when treating an injured calf or fashioning a crude toy for Emma from scraps of wood. Spring blossomed into summer. The garden flourished under Darcy's care, providing fresh vegetables that supplemented their meals of beef and game. Isaiah expanded the cattle herd with the purchase of additional stock from a neighboring ranch, a decision he discussed with Darcy as if her opinion carried equal weight to his own. Could build another room, Isaiah said one evening as they shelled peas on the porch. Off the back, for Emma, she's growing, needs her own space eventually. Darcy's hands stilled. The suggestion carried implications neither had voiced that this arrangement might extend beyond the temporary shelter he had initially offered. That would be kind, she said carefully. Not kindness, Isaiah replied, his eyes fixed on the task at hand. Practical, child needs space, and... Darcy prompted when he fell silent. Isaiah looked up, meeting her gaze directly. And I've grown used to having you both here. The ranch runs better, feels more like a home, Darcy suggested quietly. Isaiah nodded, a slight flush visible beneath his weathered complexion. Yes. Like a home. That night, Darcy lay awake, pondering the significance of Isaiah's words. She had come to appreciate the quiet strength of the man, his unwavering integrity, and the respect he showed both her and Emma. Unlike Samuel, who had viewed her primarily as an extension of himself, Isaiah treated her as a partner, valuing her contributions and respecting her autonomy. She thought of Samuel with a pang of guilt. She had loved him, or believed she had. Their marriage had been brief, just long enough to conceive and bear Emma before his death. But even in those short years, she had recognized the limitations of their union. Samuel had wanted a wife to support his ambitions, not a partner to share them. Isaiah was different. His taciturn nature masked not indifference but a thoughtfulness she had come to value. When he spoke, his words carried weight precisely because they were carefully chosen. When he listened, he did so completely, considering her perspective even when they disagreed. And there was Emma, sweet, resilient Emma, who now ran to Isaiah with the same trusting affection she had once reserved solely for her parents. Emma, who had begun calling him Zaya in her childish pronunciation, a name he answered to with a gruff tenderness that often brought unexpected tears to Darcy's eyes. Summer brought the cattle drive, a necessary journey to sell a portion of the herd in the growing settlement of Laramie. Isaiah had initially planned to go alone, leaving Darcy and Emma at the ranch with provisions and his rifle for protection. I should come with you, Darcy said as he prepared for departure. We both should. Isaiah paused in checking his saddle. Ranch needs tending. Ranch will survive a week, Darcy countered. Emma and I haven't been to town since. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Since the day her husband was murdered and her home burned, Isaiah studied her face. Town's rough, not much place for a woman and child. I'm not afraid of rough, Darcy replied, lifting her chin. And Emma needs to see more than just this ranch. She needs to know there's a world beyond these fences. Isaiah considered this, then nodded slowly. Pack light, we leave at dawn. The journey to Laramie took 3 days, with Isaiah driving the small herd of cattle, while Darcy followed in the wagon with Emma and supplies. They camped under the stars. Isaiah teaching Darcy how to build a proper fire and set up the canvas tent to shelter her and Emma from the elements. On the second night after Emma had fallen asleep in the tent, Darcy joined Isaiah by the fire. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Never gets old," Isaiah commented, following her gaze upward. "Sky out here makes a man feel small." "In a good way?" Darcy asked, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Mostly," Isaiah nodded. "Puts things in perspective. War seemed so important. Men killing each other over ideas, boundaries, out here under that sky seems foolish." It was more than he usually shared about his experiences, and Darcy recognized the significance. "You were young," she said gently. 17 when I joined," Isaiah confirmed. "Thought I was doing something righteous, freeing slaves, preserving the Union, noble causes." He stared into the fire. "Then I saw what men do to each other in the name of causes, nothing noble about it." Darcy reached out hesitantly, placing her hand on his arm. "You survived, built something good with your life afterward." Isaiah looked at her hand, then covered it with his own. "Trying to," he said quietly. They sat in companionable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Hands still joined in a tentative connection, neither seemed willing to break. Laramie bustled with activity, a stark contrast to the isolated tranquility of the ranch. Streets crowded with cowboys, miners, settlers, and the occasional soldier from the nearby fort created a cacophony that had Emma clinging to Darcy's skirts, and Darcy fighting the urge to retreat to the relative safety of the wagon. Isaiah noticed their discomfort and kept them close as he conducted his business, successfully selling the cattle for a fair price that would see them comfortably through the winter. With the transaction complete, he surprised Darcy by suggesting they remain in town an extra day. "Thought Emma might like to see the general store," he explained. "And you might appreciate some female company for a change. Mrs. Wilson, the storekeeper's wife, is a decent sort, educated, might enjoy talking books with you." The consideration behind the suggestion touched Darcy deeply. "That would be nice," she admitted, "and perhaps we could find some fabric. Emma's growing out of everything." The general store proved to be a treasure trove of necessities and small luxuries. While Isaiah discussed ranch supplies with Mr. Wilson, Darcy found herself engrossed in conversation with his wife, a former Boston socialite who had followed her husband west in search of adventure and prosperity. "Not many women brave enough to ranch alone with a child, Mrs. Wilson commented as she helped Darcy select sturdy cotton fabric. "Your husband seems a good man, though, quiet but respectful, not like some who come through town." Darcy opened her mouth to correct the assumption, then hesitated. The explanation was too complicated, too personal to share with a stranger, no matter how friendly. "Yes," she said instead, "he is a good man." Later, as they prepared to leave Laramie, Isaiah surprised her again by presenting a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For Emma," he said, handing it to Darcy, "and something for you as well." Inside, Darcy found a wooden doll for Emma, expertly carved and painted with a smiling face and yellow yarn for hair. Beneath it lay 2 books, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson and a novel by Jane Austen. Mrs. Wilson helped choose them, Isaiah explained, suddenly looking uncertain. "Said they were proper for a lady with education." Darcy traced the embossed covers with reverent fingers. "They're perfect," she whispered, blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you." Isaiah nodded, visibly relieved. Ready to head home. The word resonated with unexpected warmth. Yes, the ranch had become home, not just shelter. And the man before her had become far more than a reluctant rescuer or pragmatic partner in survival. The return journey seemed faster, perhaps because the tension of uncertainty that had marked their relationship had eased into something more comfortable. They talked more freely, sharing stories and observations, laughing at Emma's delight in the simplest pleasures of the trail. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the ranch, Darcy felt a surge of emotion at the sight of the sturdy cabin and well-tended fields. This place that had begun as temporary refuge had transformed into something precious, a sanctuary built not just of timber and stone, but of shared labor, mutual respect, and growing affection. That evening, after Emma had been tucked into bed with her new doll clutched tightly in her small arms, Darcy joined Isaiah on the porch. The summer night was warm, crickets providing a rhythmic backdrop to their conversation. "I've been thinking," Isaiah said after a comfortable silence. "About what you said, Emma needing to know the world beyond the ranch." Darcy nodded, waiting for him to continue. "Town's building a proper school next spring, bringing in a teacher from back east." Isaiah glanced at her. "But seems to me they'd do better with someone who understands the territory. Someone who knows both books and practical matters." Darcy's breath caught as she understood his implication. "Are you suggesting I apply to teach, if you wanted?" Isaiah nodded. "Could ride in a couple days a week. I'd watch Emma those days, or she could come with you when she's older, get schooling herself." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion and the clear indication that Isaiah was planning a future that included both her and Emma filled Darcy with a warm glow of possibility. "You do that. Arrange your ranch work around my teaching." Isaiah turned to face her directly. "Darcy, I do a lot more than adjust my schedule for you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Darcy found herself moving closer, drawn by the sincerity in his eyes and the gentle strength that had become her foundation in a world that had once seemed determined to break her. "Isaiah," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He waited, patient as always. "When people in town assumed we were married, I didn't correct them." She looked down, suddenly uncertain. It felt right somehow. "And that frightens me, because Samuel hasn't been gone a year, and I don't know if what I'm feeling is gratitude or something more, and Emma needs stability, not confusion." And Isaiah's hand gently covered hers, stilling her nervous words. "Darcy," he interrupted quietly. "I've been alone a long time, by choice, never met anyone worth changing that for." His eyes held her steadily. "Until a rainstorm brought you and Emma to my door, are you saying?" Darcy began, hardly daring to hope. "I'm saying there's no rush," Isaiah replied. "No pressure. We have time to figure this out, but I want you to know that I see a future here with you, with Emma, if you want it too." Darcy's response was to lean forward and press her lips gently to his, a brief, tender gesture that conveyed more than words could express. When she pulled back, Isaiah's expression held a wonder that mirrored her own feelings. "I think," she whispered, "that's a future worth building together." The remainder of summer passed in a sweet haze of deepening connection and tentative explorations of their evolving relationship. Isaiah began work on the promised addition to the cabin, creating a small but comfortable room for Emma adjacent to Darcy's. Together, they expanded the garden and prepared for the harvest, laying in preserves and dried goods for the coming winter. Their moments of affection remained mostly private, a brushing of hands while working side by side, a lingering glance across the dinner table, occasional kisses shared in the quiet moments after Emma had gone to sleep. Isaiah, respectful of Darcy's recent widowhood and mindful of propriety, never presumed more than she freely offered. For Darcy, this considerate restraint only deepened her growing love for him. She had married Samuel young, swept away by romantic notions and the promise of adventure in the West. Their courtship had been brief, passionate, but ultimately shallow, built more on physical attraction and shared ambition than genuine understanding. With Isaiah, everything moved at a different rhythm, slower, more deliberate, but infinitely more meaningful. They learned each other's habits, preferences, fears, and dreams. They disagreed sometimes, working through conflicts with honest communication rather than resentful silence or angry outbursts, as had often characterized her relationship with Samuel. And there was Emma, flourishing under their combined care, secure in the affection of two adults who put her needs above their own desires. She had taken to following Isaiah around the ranch, solemnly mimicking his actions and proudly reporting her work to Darcy each evening. "Do you think she remembers Samuel?" Darcy asked one evening as they watched Emma sleeping, the wooden doll Isaiah had given her tucked securely under one arm. Isaiah considered the question with his usual thoughtfulness. "Maybe not clearly," he finally said. "She's young. But you'll keep him alive for her with stories. She should know where she comes from." The generosity of spirit behind his words, his willingness to incorporate Samuel's memory into their developing family, rather than erase it, confirmed for Darcy what her heart already knew. She had fallen deeply in love with this quiet, honorable man. Fall brought the harvest and the first whispers of winter in the form of cooler nights and occasional morning frost. It also brought unexpected visitors. Isaiah spotted the riders approaching from the north one clear October afternoon as he and Darcy were bringing in the last of the pumpkins from the garden. "Take Emma inside," he said quietly, his hand moving instinctively to check the revolver at his hip. "Stay there until I call." Darcy followed his gaze to the dust cloud on the horizon and felt her blood run cold. "Isaiah, probably nothing," he reassured her, though his expression remained vigilant. "Just caution, go on now." Inside the cabin, Darcy closed the shutters and retrieved the rifle Isaiah had taught her to use during the summer. Emma, sensing the tension, remained unusually quiet, watching with solemn eyes as her mother prepared for potential danger. Through a crack in the shutters, Darcy watched as 3 riders approached the ranch. Even at a distance, something about the lead rider seemed disturbingly familiar. As they drew closer, recognition slammed into her with physical force. Thomas Blackburn, the man who had led the group that killed Samuel and burned their farm. Isaiah stood his ground as the riders approached, his stance casual but alert, one hand resting near his weapon. Darcy couldn't hear the initial exchange, but she saw Isaiah shake his head firmly in response to some question. Blackburn leaned forward in his saddle, gesturing expansively, his manner becoming increasingly agitated. Darcy's hand tightened on the rifle as she considered her options. The rational part of her mind urged caution. Isaiah was handling the situation. Direct confrontation would only escalate tensions. But beneath that rationality surged a tide of rage and grief. This man had destroyed her family, her home, everything she and Samuel had built together. And now he had tracked her here, threatening the new life she and Emma had found with Isaiah. Outside, the conversation was deteriorating rapidly. Blackburn dismounted, advancing toward Isaiah with aggressive intent. Without hesitation, Isaiah drew his revolver, halting the man's progress. The 2 companions remained mounted, but moved their hands toward their own weapons. "Stay back, Emma," Darcy whispered, setting down the rifle and moving swiftly to the door. She couldn't hear the exchange clearly through the thick walls of the cabin, but she needed to understand what was happening. Easing the door open slightly, Darcy caught Blackburn's voice, carried on the autumn breeze. "No, she's here, Morgan, Greene's widow. That property's legally mine now, and anything on it, including her, belongs to me too. Railroad Commission confirmed it last week." "You're mistaken," Isaiah replied, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his stance. "No one here by that description, and even if there were, women aren't property in this territory or any other." Blackburn spat on the ground. "Playing noble, are you? Word in Cheyenne is you've taken up with a pretty widow and her brat. Description matches Greene's wife perfect. Red hair, green eyes, little girl about 2 years old," he sneered. "Can't blame you for wanting a taste yourself, but she's spoken for." Isaiah's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet that even Darcy, straining to hear, could barely make out. "I suggest you leave, now, before this gets ugly." "It's already ugly," Blackburn laughed. 3 of us, one of you, and we're within our legal rights. That woman's husband died owing me money. She's payment." The blatant lie Samuel had owed nothing to this man, coupled with the vile implication behind his words, sent a surge of fury through Darcy. Before she could reconsider, she pushed the door open fully and stepped onto the porch, leaving Emma safely inside. "That's not true," she called clearly. "Samuel owed you nothing. You wanted our land for the railroad and murdered him when he refused to sell." All four men turned at the sound of her voice. Isaiah's expression flickered with concern before settling back into careful neutrality. Blackburn's face split in a triumphant grin. "Well, well," he drawled, "there she is, looking well-fed and comfortable while hiding from her obligations. Your husband signed a loan agreement, Mrs. Greene. With his death, that debt falls to you." "Show me this agreement," Darcy challenged, moving to stand beside Isaiah. "Samuel kept careful records of all our business dealings. There was no loan." Blackburn shrugged. "Papers got burned in the unfortunate fire, but the circuit judge has acknowledged my claim. You can come peacefully or we can take you. Your choice." Isaiah shifted slightly, positioning himself between Darcy and the three men. "She's not going anywhere," he said flatly. "Whatever claim you think you have, it has no standing here." "Actually," Blackburn smirked, "it is standing anywhere in the territory. Judge Hollister signed the order himself. I have the right to seize any assets belonging to Samuel Greene to satisfy the debt." He gestured dismissively at Darcy. "That includes his widow, unless she's remarried, which I'm guessing from your separate sleeping quarters. She hasn't." The casual reference to their living arrangements confirmed Darcy's suspicion that Blackburn had been watching the ranch, perhaps for days, assessing their routines and vulnerabilities. The thought sent a chill down her spine. "This is Morgan land," Isaiah stated, his voice taking on an edge of steel. "You have no authority here. Leave now and there won't be trouble." Blackburn's hand moved to his holster. "I was hoping you'd say that." What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Blackburn drew his pistol, but Isaiah was faster, firing a single shot that caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him backward. The two mounted men immediately drew their weapons, but Isaiah had anticipated this, diving sideways and pulling Darcy down with him as bullets splintered the porch railing where they had been standing. From her position behind the meager cover of the porch steps, Darcy saw Isaiah return fire, his movements economical and precise despite the chaos. One of the mounted men cried out, clutching his arm, while the other's horse reared in panic, nearly unseating its rider. Blackburn, recovering from the initial shock of his wound, scrambled for his dropped weapon. Without conscious thought, Darcy lunged forward, kicking the pistol out of reach. Blackburn snarled, grabbing for her ankle, but she evaded his grasp and retreated back to Isaiah's position. "Inside," Isaiah urged, firing again to keep the remaining gunmen at bay. "Get Emma and barricade the back room." Darcy hesitated, torn between the need to protect her daughter and reluctance to leave Isaiah facing three adversaries alone. Her indecision cost her precious seconds, enough time for Blackburn to retrieve his weapon and fire wildly in their direction. The bullet splintered wood inches from Darcy's head. Isaiah responded with calculated precision, his shot catching Blackburn squarely in the chest. The man crumpled, his expression frozen in permanent surprise. The remaining riders, witnessing their leader's fall, exchanged a brief glance before spurring their horses into retreat, one supporting the other who was clearly wounded. Within moments, they had disappeared beyond the ridge, leaving only swirling dust and the ominous stillness of their fallen companion. Isaiah remained vigilant, scanning the horizon for any sign of their return before finally lowering his weapon. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern as he turned to examine Darcy. "No," she managed, though her entire body trembled with delayed shock. "Emma is safe," Isaiah assured her, helping her to her feet. "Let's get inside. They might come back with reinforcements." Inside, they found Emma hiding exactly where Darcy had instructed her to remain, her eyes wide with fear, but her composure remarkable for one so young. "Bad men gone," she asked as Darcy gathered her into a fierce embrace. Yes, sweet girl, Darcy soothed, though she exchanged a worried glance with Isaiah over the child's head. The bad men are gone. While Darcy comforted Emma, Isaiah quickly gathered essentials into saddlebags: food, clothing, the small bag of coins from the cattle sale, and the books he had given Darcy in Laramie. His movements were swift and methodical, those of a man accustomed to emergency departures. We need to leave, he explained as he worked. Those men will be back, likely with others. Blackburn might have been bluffing about the judge's order, but we can't risk waiting to find out. Where will we go? Darcy asked, helping Emma into her warmest clothes. Isaiah paused, considering. North to Montana Territory. I have a friend there, another veteran. He's been trying to convince me to join him in starting a larger operation, more land, better water access. He met Darcy's gaze directly. It would mean starting over. Darcy thought of the garden she had tended all summer, the additions to the cabin that Isaiah had built with such care, the life they had begun creating together. Then she looked at Emma, so vulnerable and trusting, and at Isaiah, the man who had become her partner, protector, and love. Starting over is better than looking back, she said firmly. We'll go with you. The decision made, they worked quickly to prepare for departure. Isaiah saddled his two best horses, securing their supplies and creating a makeshift seat for Emma in front of Darcy's saddle. Before they left, he dragged Blackburn's body a considerable distance from the cabin, refusing Darcy's offer to help with the grim task. Best you don't, he said simply. Some memories aren't worth keeping. By nightfall, they were miles from the ranch, following game trails through dense forest to avoid the main roads where Blackburn's associates might be watching. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, building only the smallest fire necessary to warm Emma, who had fallen asleep exhausted from the day's events. I'm sorry, Darcy said as they sat close together, sharing warmth and keeping watch. This is my fault. I brought this danger to your door. Isaiah shook his head. No apologies needed. Blackburn was a land grabber working for the railroad companies. Sooner or later he would have come for my ranch too. He took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. Besides, I'd rather face a dozen Blackburns than go back to living alone. Darcy leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Will your friend in Montana welcome us, all of us? Daniel's a good man, Isaiah assured her. Lost his wife in childbirth a few years back. Understands loneliness. He'll welcome the company, especially someone who can cook better than either of us. He smiled faintly. And he has a daughter about Emma's age, Caroline. They could be friends. The thought of Emma having a playmate lifted Darcy's spirits slightly. How long will it take to reach Montana? 2 weeks, maybe 3, depending on weather and how fast we can travel with Emma. Isaiah glanced upward at the clear night sky. We should have good conditions for a while yet, but winter comes early in the mountains. They traveled steadily northward over the following days, avoiding settlements and keeping to less traveled routes. Isaiah proved to be an expert guide, finding game for their meals and secure locations for their nightly camps. Emma, resilient as always, adapted quickly to life on the trail, treating the journey as a grand adventure. The landscape changed as they progressed, rolling plains giving way to foothills, and eventually the rugged grandeur of the Rocky Mountains. They crossed into Montana Territory on the 10th day, following the Yellowstone River through valleys of breathtaking beauty. Never seen anything like it, Darcy marveled as they paused on a ridge overlooking a vast canyon. It's like something from a storybook. Isaiah nodded, his expression softening as he surveyed the wilderness. First time I saw these mountains after the war, knew I'd never go back east. Something about this country. It heals a man. And a woman, Darcy added softly, thinking of her own healing over the past months. The raw wound of Samuel's death had gradually transformed into a quiet sorrow she could carry without being consumed by it. In its place had grown something new, her love for Isaiah, different from what she had felt for Samuel, but deeper. more enduring. As they descended into a lush valley on the 14th day of their journey, Isaiah pointed to smoke rising from a distant cluster of buildings. Daniel's ranch, he explained. Paradise Valley, he calls it, not far now. The ranch was larger than Isaiah's, with several substantial buildings arranged around a central courtyard. Fields of hay extended in neat rows, and herds of cattle grazed on the surrounding hillsides. As they approached, a tall man emerged from the main house, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. "Isaiah Morgan, as I live and breathe," the man called, striding forward to meet them. "When I invited you to visit, I didn't expect you'd bring the whole family." Isaiah dismounted, clasping the man's hand warmly. "Daniel, good to see you." He turned to help Darcy and Emma down from their horse. "This is Darcy Greene and her daughter Emma. They've been staying with me. We've had some trouble." Daniel's expression grew serious as he noted their travel-worn appearance and the alertness with which Isaiah continued to scan their surroundings. "Trouble follows you as always, I see." He smiled warmly at Darcy and Emma, "but you've brought some sunshine with it this time." "Welcome to Paradise Ranch, ladies. Any friends of Isaiah's are welcome here." A small figure darted from behind Daniel's legs, a girl about Emma's age, with blonde pigtails and a curious expression. "Is she staying?" the child asked, pointing at Emma. "Can she play with my horses?" Daniel laughed. "Manners, Caroline. This is Emma, and yes, I expect she'll be staying a while. Why don't you show her your horses while the adults talk?" After a reassuring nod from Darcy, Emma cautiously followed Caroline toward the house. The two girls already engaged in serious discussion about the relative merits of various toy horses. Inside, over coffee and a hearty meal prepared by Daniel's housekeeper, Isaiah explained their situation: Blackburn's attack, the hasty departure from the ranch, and the uncertainty of what legal claim, if any, the man might have had. "Blackburn," Daniel frowned. "Working for the Transcontinental, no doubt. They've been buying up land all through Wyoming, by fair means or foul, but he won't find you here. Montana's still wild enough that a man's claim means something, regardless of what some railroad judge says." "We can't impose indefinitely," Darcy began, but Daniel waved away her concern. "Nonsense. Isaiah's like a brother to me, saved my life at Petersburg, and this place is too big for one man and a child." He glanced between them, his expression knowing. "Besides, I've been trying to convince this stubborn mule to partner with me for years. 2 experienced ranchers, a proper garden," he nodded appreciatively at Darcy, "and children to inherit it all someday. Sounds like the making of a proper operation to me." Later that evening, after the children had been put to bed in the room they would share, Darcy found Isaiah on the porch, staring at the stars that seemed impossibly bright in the clear mountain air. "Daniel seems kind," she said, joining him at the railing, "and generous." Isaiah nodded. "Best man I know, offers a good one." Darcy studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw, but Isaiah sighed. "But I had my own place, built it myself, hate losing it to thieves." "We could go back," Darcy suggested, though the thought filled her with dread. "Fight the legal battle." Isaiah shook his head. "Not worth the risk, not with you and Emma." He turned to face her fully. "Darcy, I need to know something." She waited, sensing the importance of whatever he was struggling to articulate. "If we stay here, make this our home, would you? That is, I know it hasn't been long since Samuel, and I understand if you need more time, but—" He took a deep breath. "Would you consider becoming my wife, properly, I mean, not just for appearance or protection, but because you love me," Darcy supplied gently. Isaiah's expression softened with relief at her understanding. "Yes, because I love you, both of you, and I want to build something permanent, something that can't be taken away." Darcy stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "Isaiah Morgan, I would be honored to become your wife. Not because I need protection or security, but because somewhere between that rainy day when you found us and this moment under the Montana stars, I fell completely in love with you." Isaiah's arms encircled her, drawing her close as his lips found hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise of a future built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the deep, abiding love that had grown between them against all odds. Spring in Montana brought renewal in more ways than one. The ranch flourished under the combined efforts of Daniel and Isaiah, their partnership proving as successful as Daniel had predicted. Darcy divided her time between tending an expanded garden, caring for the children, and planning for their future. Emma and Caroline had become inseparable, their initial cautious friendship blossoming into a bond that had all the adults smiling at their childhood certainty that they were, in fact, sisters despite all evidence to the contrary. On a perfect May morning, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the distant mountains still capped with snow, Darcy Greene became Darcy Morgan in a simple ceremony performed by a traveling minister. Emma stood proudly at her mother's side, holding a bouquet of prairie flowers almost as large as herself, while Caroline served as self-appointed flower girl, scattering petals with enthusiastic abandon. "Never thought I'd see this day," Daniel commented during the celebration afterward, clapping Isaiah on the shoulder. The most stubborn bachelor in the regiment, finally tamed by a woman with enough spirit to match him. Isaiah smiled, his eyes following Darcy as she danced with both little girls, their laughter carrying across the ranch yard. "Not tamed," he corrected, "just found something worth changing for." As the evening cooled and the celebration wound down, Isaiah found Darcy alone on the porch of the small cabin he had built for their family adjacent to the main ranch house, a wedding gift that had taken him months of secret labor. "Happy?" he asked, joining her in watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and crimson. Darcy turned to him, her eyes reflecting both the fading light and the depth of her feelings. "More than I ever imagined possible," she admitted. "When you found us that day in the rain, I thought my life was ending. I couldn't see beyond the loss, the fear." She reached for his hand, entwining their fingers. "I never dreamed that day was actually a beginning." Isaiah drew her close, his arms encircling her with the same protective tenderness he had offered on that first rain-soaked encounter. "I said nothing then," he reminded her, "just held you both." "Sometimes," Darcy whispered, leaning into his embrace as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, "the most important things don't need words." In the years that followed, Paradise Ranch prospered, expanding into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Darcy eventually established a small school on the property, teaching not only Emma and Caroline, but the children of neighboring ranches and the ranch hands' families as well. Isaiah and Daniel's partnership became legendary in the region, two Civil War veterans who had transformed a remote valley into a model of innovative ranching practices, fair treatment of workers, and community leadership. When Montana achieved statehood in 1889, both men were invited to participate in the Constitutional Convention, their perspectives on land rights and equitable governance shaped by their experiences on both sides of the law. Emma grew into a confident young woman, inheriting her mother's intelligence and her stepfather's quiet strength. By her 18th birthday, she had developed a keen interest in the legal aspects of ranching and land management, a path Isaiah encouraged, recognizing in her the potential to protect others from experiencing what her parents had endured. And through it all, the challenges of frontier life, the joys of watching their family and ranch grow, the occasional threats from those who envied their success, Isaiah and Darcy remained steadfast in their partnership. The love that had begun in crisis had deepened through shared purpose and mutual respect into something as enduring as the mountains that sheltered their home. On the 20th anniversary of their first meeting, Isaiah surprised Darcy by taking her back to the exact spot where they had encountered each other on that rain-soaked Wyoming road. A memorial marker now stood there, part of the newly established Territorial Historic Trail. You remember?" He asked as they stood hand in hand before the simple stone. "Every moment," Darcy replied softly. "The rain, the fear, the way you said nothing just held us both." She squeezed his hand. "I was so broken that day." Isaiah nodded, his eyes reflecting 2 decades of shared memories. "We both were, in different ways. But sometimes broken pieces fit together to make something stronger than either was alone." As they turned back toward their horses and the journey home to Montana, Darcy paused for one last look at the marker, a simple testament to a moment that had changed everything. "Who would have thought," she mused, "that the worst day of my life would lead to the best years I could imagine?" Isaiah smiled, helping her mount her horse with the same gentle care he had shown that first day. "That's the thing about rain," he said. "Eventually it stops, and what comes after is always worth waiting for." Together, they rode north toward home, toward their children and grandchildren, toward the life they had built from the remnants of shattered dreams, a life richer, fuller, and more meaningful than either could have envisioned on that rainy afternoon when a taciturn cowboy found a desperate woman standing in the rain with her child, said nothing, and simply held them both.